Today, we're chatting vegan pets with Professor Andrew Knight, who holds several professional positions, including that of Professor of Animal Welfare and Ethics at the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons. He's been honoured with 11 awards for his work in animal welfare and academia, so I think it's fair to assume that he knows a thing or two. The topic of vegan pets can be a very contentious one, so I'm extremely grateful that he's taken the time to be with us today. Professor, welcome to the channel.
Good morning.
Great to have you. Could you start off by telling us a little bit about what your work entails, please?
Sure. So for the last couple of years, I've been doing research into the topic of vegan and alternative companion animal diet, so pet food. And I've been looking at the areas that pet guardians care most about, and they are the health outcomes of animals on these different diets, how happy the animals are, so how palatable the foods are, the quality of the diets, are they being manufactured to good standards, the environmental sustainability of the diet. So all these sorts of aspects, and
fantastic,
really exciting research.
Yeah, I'd like to get into some of the details of your studies a bit later, but just first of all, a few more general questions, if I may. According to the data, it appears that cats fed complete vegan foods do just as well, or possibly even better than cats on standard pet foods. However, these are made from things that cats naturally wouldn't eat. How is it that they seem to thrive on it? My theory is it perhaps is because the nutrients are the things that are essential. It's not the foods per se. Is that a fair assessment? And is there more to it?
That is a fair assessment. All species have biological requirements for a certain set of nutrients. None of them have any requirement for any particular ingredient. And we often forget that nutrients and ingredients are not the same thing. So cats don't need meat. Meat's an ingredient. What they need is a certain set of nutrients.
Yeah.
And if we formulate diets from plant, mineral and synthetic sources that include all of the nutrients they require, there's no biological reason to expect that they would experience any problems.
Yeah.
Essentially, it's true that when we do this, we will often avoid dietary hazards that may be associated with meat-based pet foods. So it's understandable that we would expect health outcomes to be at least as good and possibly better because of the avoidance of dietary hazards, providing that the diet is nutritionally complete. You can't just attempt this at home and knock together a few strawberries and some soy milk and something and hope your cat will be fine. It does need to be formulated to...
So it's foods specifically engineered for a carnivore, is what we're talking about.
Yeah. The best companies, I think, are the ones that are working with PhD or specialist nutritionists to carefully formulate their diets and make sure they are nutritionally complete.
Fantastic. So I've heard about taurine. Of course, there's DHA. I hear that we've got arachidonic acid from seaweed, which really surprised me to put into the foods. What are the other sort of essential nutrients that ordinarily they'd have to get from eating animal flesh?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's macronutrients, so things like protein, carbohydrates, and fats, and there are specific amino acids and fatty acids and vitamins. Cats have a particularly high requirement for protein compared to most species. They have a requirement for over 30% of a diet to be protein, and this comes from their evolutionary biology, hunting and getting pretty much all of their nutritional requirements from prey animal species that they would naturally consume. So when we formulate an artificial diet for them, we need to ensure that it does have a high protein content and also things like taurine, which, I mean, dogs and people can synthesize taurine from other amino acids, but cats can't. So we need to ensure that the diet does have enough taurine. Interestingly, commercial meat-based cat food, the taurine gets pretty much degraded during processing because of the high temperatures involved in the processing of the pet food, and has to be added again afterwards from a synthetic source. So the taurine in meat-based cat food is synthetic taurine mostly, and we of course use the same synthetic taurine in plant-based pet food as well. So yeah, we just need to make sure that all the nutrients that they need are present, and when we do that, that they're also adequately digestible. The digestibility of the different ingredients seems to be broadly similar between the meat and the plant-based ingredients. and then we wouldn't expect any problems to occur. And we can study that by looking at the animals themselves and looking at their health outcomes.
If you'd like to optimize your health, body shape, or performance with a vegan diet, then please check out my new online nutrition course. I've launched it at a low introductory price. It contains 14 videos, 3 cookbooks, and masses of downloadable and printable PDFs, including a complete nutrition chart for all ages and stages of life, so you can be sure that the whole family is thriving. Now, I've only kept cats myself, so I've not looked into dog food. How does the data for complete dog food, vegan dog food, compare with the standard fare? Is it a similar sort of tale?
Yeah, it's the same story, except that they don't have as high a requirement for protein, and they can synthesize their own taurine.
Okay.
So dogs are considered to be less pure carnivores than cats are. Dogs are considered to be more biologically omnivorous. They have co-evolved with humans for somewhere between 20 and 40,000 years. Cats, only 8,000 years.
Okay.
And in the longer time period that dogs have had, I mean, this happened when the most confident wolves and wolf cubs started coming closer to human campfires from our hunter-gatherer ancestors and becoming adopted and receiving scraps from our campfires. And they might have been scraps of meat, but also cooked root vegetables. Mm-hmm. And over time, they altered their physiology to be able to derive nutritional benefit from cooked root vegetables, which is starchy, carbohydrate-rich foods. So they changed from the wolf ancestors that they used to be, and they became more biologically omnivorous. Whereas cats had a different role. Their role was to really guard our grain stores from rodents.
Okay, interesting.
So, so they weren't eating cooked root vegetables, they were hunting rodents.
Right. This is all news to me. This is fascinating stuff. I love it. I read in an article, they quoted you as saying that no population study to date, or even a single case study, has ever found it detrimental for cats to eat a complete vegan cat food. Is that correct?
Yes, that's true. There was one study showing that cats did worse on a vegan diet, but it wasn't nutritionally complete. It was deliberately formulated to be deficient in potassium. And surprise, surprise, after time, the cats showed signs of potassium deficiency. But there haven't been any studies showing that a nutritionally sound vegan diet has resulted in adverse outcomes. Indeed, the contrary is true. The first large-scale study, and this was published last year in one of the world's leading vet journals, and it showed that the vegan cats actually did better. They had less body weight problems. They were more likely to be in ideal body condition. They had less gastrointestinal and liver problems, and they're more likely to be reported by their guardians as being in very good health.
Wow.
So in all other metrics, there was no significant differences between the meat-based and plant-based cats.
Okay, so a follow-up question then. Some people accuse vegans of animal abuse because of feeding, particularly cats, this complete vegan food. Given that all the studies to date have either found a wash or benefits in terms of health to the complete vegan food, is it a stretch to say that, if anything, it's slightly better to use the vegan food?
Yeah, well, the animal abuse question is an interesting one. If you're supplying a diet which results in health outcomes which are just as good, then I suppose the only other way that it could be animal abuse would be if the animals were unhappy, they were being psychologically harmed, or their behaviour was being affected. They basically were showing signs of unhappiness. So we studied this in detail last year and published the results in one of the world's leading scientific journals last year. We looked at 2,500 dogs and about 1,300 plus cats, and we studied their behaviour when they were eating the different diets based on the reports of the guardians of all these cats. And we studied about 10 behavioural indicators in dogs and 15 in cats, and we figured out which ones were the indicators of positive palatability and which ones were negative, showing the pets did not like their food. And then we looked for differences between the diets, and we analysed it all statistically and in great detail. And we found that there are slight differences. So dogs fed raw meat diets appeared to be enjoying their food just slightly more than non-conventional meat diets, but the vegans, there were no statistically significant differences across the board with the dogs. they seem to be just as happy as far as you can tell by detailed study of their behaviour.
Wow.
And of course, they can't tell us, so that's all we can do. With the cats, overall, there was no significant differences. In a couple of indicators, it looked like those on vegan cat food were actually enjoying their food more. But if you look at the average overall, there was no significant difference. So you can claim it's animal abuse, but you're doing so, contrary to evidence and sound reasoning. We know that the health outcomes are as good or better if the diets are nutritionally sound. And as far as you can tell by detailed study of the behaviour, the animals are just as happy. So there's no evidence or reason to indicate that it's any kind of abuse. The contrary is more likely to be true if you are avoiding dietary hazards associated with some meat-based pet foods and resulting in health outcomes that are occasionally better.
That's very interesting. And I must say, all three cats that we've kept on a vegan diet all preferred the vegan food. They all jumped straight over to it. We were going to slowly transition them, but they just loved it so much. Is there a potential gut microbiome issue from them jumping, or is it best to sort of slowly introduce the vegan foods and take out the standard foods?
Yeah, there are digestive enzymes that are produced to help digest different foodstuffs, and it takes some time for one set of enzymes to change to a new set. And there's also the bacterial population in the guts that are involved in digestion of food, and it takes some time for those to transition to a new food as well. So you are more likely to get adverse effects such as diarrhea if there's a sudden change in diet. I would advise a gradual transition over a week or two, ideally. For cats that seem to be a little bit behaviourally addicted to certain palatability enhancers, so tasty additives, it can take much longer to transition them off something that they have grown accustomed to and are addicted to. But as far as the digestive enzymes and the bacteria in the gut, 1 to 2 weeks should be fine to.
Wow, so that's quick. Yeah, fantastic. Is there a problem with cats only eating dry kibble?
Well, there are wet foods and there are dry foods, such as dry kibble, and they can be appropriate for different medical conditions. So dry food is much more concentrated. Wet food has a much higher proportion of water within the food, which doesn't provide any calories, but it does fill up the stomach. So if you've got an animal where you're trying to achieve a body weight reduction, then wet food will be helpful in that respect. Dry food is much more concentrated in calories. And dry food can be better for the teeth. Wet food would be better if there was a urinary tract problem and you needed a lot of fluid to be flowing through the urinary system to help flush it out. So it depends a bit what the if there's a medical concern, what that concern is. If there are no medical concerns, then it doesn't really make any difference.
Okay, good to know. Now, I understand that cats eating vegan foods can potentially develop crystals in the urine. Initially, I heard that in this case, the cat would need to be fed meat. But more recently, I heard there's some kind of supplement that can be added to avoid this. Is that true?
Yeah. So the concern has always been that vegan pet foods are more alkalinizing. They're less likely to result in acidic urine. And as the acidity of the urine decreases, certain minerals are more likely to crystallize out and come together to form tiny stones and then bigger stones and block up the urinary system, which is very serious if it happens. So it's been the concern. There have been a small number of reports of people who felt that this has happened for their cats. So the advice has been to monitor the urinary acidity to see whether it's becoming more alkaline. It's quite easy to do that with little paper strips that tell you what the acidity is, and then to add in vitamin C or methionine pills or other kinds of additives to acidify. However, the interesting thing is that the first large-scale study of the health of vegan cats, published last year in one of the world's top veterinary journals, did not find a problem with the lower urinary system. It did not find this problem occurring in the vegan cats. And when we have done the same thing also in a large number of vegan cats, and we will be publishing results of this in a scientific paper, scientific journal this coming year. we also did not find a problem with the urinary system. So the best available evidence is the studies looking at populations of large numbers compared to small case reports. So the best available evidence does not indicate there is actually a problem in this respect. If people are worried, they could still monitor the urinary acidity and look out for that. But as far as we can tell, we haven't detected any difference in rates of this problem.
I never understood this, because I thought that the food is pH balanced specifically for them. So I couldn't see how it could be a thing.
Yes, and that's a fair point. There have been a small number of stories reported in books and on websites by guardians of vegan cats who feel that this has occurred and it's because of the food, but they haven't been well studied. And when we've looked at the prevalence of this problem in much larger groups, we haven't found a significant difference between the meat-based and the plant-based. So maybe it's a concern that we've been too worried about this problem. It would be interesting to study this in really huge numbers of vegan cats and see whether it came up as an issue or not. I would like to do further research.
Yeah, I've heard of it once when we became vegan, and then of course I went whole foods plant-based for my health, but then the ethics came into it. And then, I saw what we were feeding the cats in our care. But we were very scared to make the jump because we hadn't read the science. And we spoke to dozens upon dozens of cat owners. We heard of one person, one of our friends, in one of her 6 cats, that problem did apparently occur. But that's the only time I've heard about it, from people I know anyway.
Right, and that's interesting. If you spoke to dozens and dozens of meat-eating cat owners, you might well find the same thing cropped up as well.
Right, sure. Yeah. That makes sense. That's good to know. That's reassuring. Are there any specific vegan pet food brands that you recommend over others?
I don't really. What I recommend is that people look out for signs of good quality. So you should be checking the labelling claims to make sure the diet is formulated to be nutritionally complete for adults or juveniles or whatever it might be. If the company appears to have good standards, if there's any information about whether they get their diets checked by laboratories to make sure they are nutritionally complete, e.g. on a website, if it says that they're working with veterinary nutritionists or other specialist nutritionists, that would be helpful as well. If they decline to answer any questions about these kinds of things, then that would be a red flag. So I think those simple steps to try and get an idea of the quality of the diet is a good idea. We studied a whole bunch of these companies and published results last year as well in another scientific paper. And we found that the standards involved in formulating and creating these diets didn't differ very much between the vegan diets and the meat-based ones. All the companies seem to have fairly good standards in most cases. The plant-based ones had a slight advantage overall. They weren't being formulated to lower standards overall. So I think that people don't need to be too worried about that, providing that they follow those common sense steps to try to check that it's a diet that's nutritionally complete for their species and life stage, and they look for signs of good quality. Independent laboratory checking would be fantastic if that information was available from the company. I think there's at least one company that started to do that, which is good.
Yeah, fantastic. Okay, now with my background in nutrition, I realised my own hypocrisy that I recommend a whole foods diet for humans, but when it comes to the cats in my care, I am feeding them a processed food, albeit one designed, for a carnivore. In the future, once lab-grown meat is more readily available, do you think it would potentially be even healthier to leverage that? Or do you think that the complete vegan pet food would still compete just as well as they do against the standard pet food? Based on what you were saying earlier about some detriments in meat, I'm guessing I know the answer, but yeah, I just thought I'd like to really granulate that.
Yeah, the question about lab-grown meat is really interesting. Obviously, that is coming on stream for humans and no doubt will come for animals as well. I believe there's a company formulating in vitro mouse treats.
No way. Wow.
I don't think the complete diets are available yet. from the animals' perspective, I think what matters to them is that they get all the nutrients they need and their health outcomes are just as good. And we've studied that, and it is the case as far as the evidence indicates so far. And we have studied their behaviour, and it indicates that these animals on these vegan diets are just as healthy as far as we can tell from detailed study of behaviour. Mm-hmm. So from the animal's perspective, it doesn't necessarily, it's probably not going to make any difference. From the human perspective, there are obviously some people that would feel happier about feeding an in vitro meat diet to their pets rather than a vegan diet to their pets. Mm-hmm. But from the animal's perspective, it looks like it's not going to make any difference to happiness or health outcomes.
Yeah, fantastic. That's great. Now, we've talked already, and you said that you've published studies in several different areas. Could you tell us about some of the studies and their outcomes?
Sure. So one of the most exciting ones I'm doing at the moment is to look at the environmental sustainability metrics. So if, let's say, the world's cats and dogs were switched onto a vegan diet, how many additional people could you feed with the food energy saved? How many food animals would you not have to slaughter each year? How much land could you save? Water, greenhouse gases, fertilizers, pesticides. So I'm busy calculating this at the moment, and I've just had a bit of a breakthrough. I've found a way to do this. It required to be able to work out how much of conventional pet food is byproduct and how much is animals that would be otherwise consumed by people. And it hasn't been practically possible to do this until recently, and I've found a way to do this. So now I can generate those results. And I've had an initial look at results for America's cats and dogs because there's the most information available from the US about all sorts of environmental metrics. And it appears that there's a really significant proportion of the US human population could be fed with the food energy saved if America's cats and dogs all went vegan. There are over 1 billion land animals each year that would be spared from slaughter. And there's really substantial amounts of land use, greenhouse gases, water use, and so on, which would all be saved. So that's one of the super exciting things that I'm working on right now. This hasn't been done before. The other things are these really big studies looking at health outcomes and behavioural outcomes in cats and dogs on vegan versus meat-based diets. And in 2019, we surveyed more than 4,000 cat and dog guardians to ask them about all these sorts of things. And we have started to publish results in scientific journals. So the one I mentioned showing that the vegan pet food seems to be just as enjoyable for cats and dogs. And we're also in the process of publishing the health outcomes one. And they also look positive for the vegan diets as well, which is really exciting.
Fantastic.
And there haven't been, there's been almost no studies like this until now. There has been one recently published showing that the health outcomes of vegan cats are at least as good and in a few respects are better than those on meat-based diets. But we've had nothing else. We've had really small groups of animals, but there's been no large-scale population studies until these. So it's hugely exciting to be working in this area at the moment.
Yeah, I bet. That's fantastic. Okay, great. Just a couple of more personal questions to finish up, if I may. I read that you started making waves when you were still a veterinary student in Australia by refusing to kill animals in your training. I find that very endearing. Do you mind to tell us about that?
Yes, it's been the case in Australia and most other regions of the world, although not United Kingdom for many decades, to its credit, that people have learned veterinary surgery by practicing surgical procedures on healthy animals and then killing them at the end of the procedure, unfortunately. And also learning subjects such as physiology and biochemistry by conducting invasive and often lethal experiments on animals to demonstrate well-established scientific concepts. So one other student, myself, refused to participate in all of this animal killing in our veterinary degree, and we took legal action against the university, and we exposed what was happening to the mass media in Australia, which made primetime television. And all of these resulted in rapid change at my university, and similar things have gone on at other universities in Australia and abroad. And the results were that we were able to set up an alternative surgery program that didn't require any animals to be killed. We could sterilise homeless animals from animal shelters and return them for adoption. And the university established a formal policy recognising that some students may have conscientiously held beliefs against harming animals or other aspects of their lives, and the university agreed to make reasonable efforts to accommodate those in teaching and assessment. And those policies have spread to other universities in Australia and internationally as well. So
fantastic.
It's a huge exciting area. Yeah.
Good man. I love it. And last little question. Have you kept companion animals yourself that you fed a vegan diet? And if so, how have they fared?
Yes. So we did look after a couple of vegan cats for about 6 months when I was staying in the Netherlands, and we were looking after my sister-in-law's cats while they were travelling, and we cooked some homemade kibble for them. We formulated our own kibble and cooked it in the oven and added nutritional supplements and so on.
Wow.
And I tried sampling some of this myself. And it was interesting. It was crunchy. It wasn't that delicious for me as a person. And the cats in this case appear to do well. One of the reports of benefits can be skin condition problems, and the fur became sleeker and shinier, and the inflammation, the sort of occasional little scabby raised parts on the skin of the cats disappeared as well. So I think they had probably been having a food allergic type reaction to something in their previous diets, which probably resolved on the vegan diets that we were feeding. I don't recommend generally that people try to make their own homemade diets though, because so many studies showing that it's too easy to get this wrong. It's much safer to purchase a diet that's been formulated by an expert company to be nutritionally complete, and to do it that way. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, this has been brilliant. I've learned so much. I really appreciated your time. Is there anything you'd like to add before we wrap up today?
Yeah, I guess, look, if anyone's interested in learning about this issue or advice for transitioning animals onto vegan pet food safely, I have summaries and also these scientific studies as they're being published at my website, which is sustainablepetfood.info. And there are short videos with these new studies as they come out, and I'd love it if everyone could share them through social media so that we can make more pet guardians aware of this information as it's been becoming available.
Fantastic. Professor Knight, thank you so much for taking the time today. And on behalf of the people, the planet and the animals, thank you so much for all the amazing work that you're doing.
Thank you very much indeed. Have a great day.